we're here to celebrate Wedding of the Foxes, Katherine Larson's third book, right? One of which is very hard to find. So you can explain that if you want to, but this follows the poetry collection, Radial Symmetry, and another collection called The Speechless Ones. For those who don't know already, Katherine's a 1996 Flinn Scholar. We always start by Flinn Scholar year and what high school we went to. So Flagstaff High School, 1996. The U of A for undergrad for creative writing and ecology and revolutionary about 2 degrees. And then the University of Virginia for a master's in creative writing. She is a conservationist. She is a writer, she's a teacher, and I'm going to add to that. And I think you'll hear this instantly in her work, an intercultural explorer. And just a wonderful person to have in our community, to have here again, so after some wandering here and there. We'd like to start with a couple of questions that are just actually to orient you a little bit. Can you talk with us first about how being a member of the Flinn Scholars community and your Flinn Scholars experience affected your path over the last few decades?
Absolutely. So, and this is a nice full circle moment too, because Matt was actually the person when I was in high school. He was the person that came to my high school to talk a little bit about the Flinn Scholar program, and was the one that I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. This is it. And for me, there was absolutely no question that if I was offered the scholarship, I would take it. And it has been one of the most remarkable opportunities of my life. I think that one of the things that was so helpful for me was the scholar program offered so much freedom. So I was one of those people that really didn't know what I wanted to do because I wanted to do too many things. And so I knew that I wanted to travel. I knew that there were a few things I wanted to study. And so when I got to school, it was amazing because I was able to pursue it all. And I was not just encouraged to do so, but I was given a support system in which I could thrive in doing it. So I did do a BS in ecology and evolutionary biology, and at the same time I did a BA in creative writing and honors in English and minors in chemistry and math and physics. But I also got a chance to study at Makerere University in Kampala. So I used my travel money to go there for a semester, and then the University of Limerick in Ireland. And I studied at the Biosphere Center as well. So I spent a semester there and was able to study with Tony Burgess, who has since passed away, but was one of the architects of the desert biome at the Biosphere. So I got to first learn ecology there. And I mean, in almost every capacity of my life from that moment on, the Flinn has been a part of my life, and you all are a part of that family. I even in sort of looking at MFA programs, for example, there were Flinn Scholars that I talked to about that, and Flinn Scholars that I continue to connect with, to this day. Some scholars are among my favorite people in the world. So just the trajectory and the kind of freedom that the scholar opportunity gave me was unparalleled. I feel very, very grateful to have had that and grateful to be here today to share this event.
Well, thank you. So this is a book of 19 essays. They are very different in structure and kind from one another. One of the features of this book, though, is a series of letters to other writers that function very inherently in the structure of the book and what it all means together. But of course, that makes me want to know more broadly, who do you think of as the important influences on your writing and that we might find in this book?
It's a great question, and also a kind of impossible question. I mean, I think that there's different moments in life in which a certain cohort of people really shepherded me through. And so definitely when I was beginning to study writing and looking at the books that I was drawn to, it was a lot of environmental writers. So everyone from Barry Lopez and Rebecca Solnit and E.O. Wilson, that kind of thing was one of my sort of first sources of influence. And then I got really interested in poetry. So there's so like whole cohorts of poets, like Russian poets and Surrealist poets and etc. So it's probably more helpful to talk about at least a little bit. And I'll probably read a little bit of an essay talking about my attraction to Japanese literature, which really started. I had a wonderful teacher in graduate school that allowed me to take her fiction writing class. I had to like petition and beg her because it was a sort of small class, but her name was Deborah Eisenberg. And she introduced me to Kawabata Yasunari and Tanasaki Junichiro. And from there, that sort of sparked this kind of long, deep look into Japanese literature. So that's kind of the more recent piece, I think, for this book.
Good, good. Well, I think it's almost time to read, but before we do, you said that this is a book of lyric essays. So a little bit different than what we might find in a collection of some journalist somewhere or a fiction writer who compiles all of their essays from over the years. What is a lyric essay?
Great question. So my first degree was in poetry, and the lyric essay is a form that really makes use of some of those poetic techniques. So in a lyric essay, you're going to find a lot more blank space on the page. You're going to find there's several different kinds, and there's several different kinds in the book. One of them that I use a lot is called a braided lyric essay. And in a braided lyric essay, you're starting with sort of two or more different and sometimes very disparate strands, and then you kind of weave them together like a braid. And the idea is that each strand is sort of speaking in dialogue to the other strand in ways that may not be fully sort of logically put out, but maybe associatively they're talking to each other, maybe imagistically they're talking to each other. So that by the end of the essay, you should reach a point at which each strand is actually made bigger and kind of enlarged so that it all kind of hopefully fits together. So you'll notice if with a lyric essay, you can sometimes be a little bit discombobulated at the beginning because you're like, okay, what's going on? We were just here and now we're talking about this, but then typically you're going to move back and forth between them. And then another form of essay I use in this book is a like a flash essay. And that you'll find in the letters, the sort of like epistolary essay. So it's an essay, but you're finding a form of a letter. I think Philip Lopate talked about how an essay is an invitation to think alongside someone. And especially with the lyric essay, it becomes a really nice opportunity because you're circling around topics that may or may not have an actual conclusion, but you can sort of go on this journey with the author and see where you arrive. And it may not be the place that you think you're going to, and it may not be like a very conclusive place, but you've made the journey together, reader and writer. Helps.
Okay, well, let's begin.
Okay, thank you. But I first have to really begin by thanking Matt Ellsworth and Ann Larson of the Flinn Foundation, because it is very, very special to be here today, and I'm so grateful. And in fact, several of the formative experiences that I actually talk about in this book and actually both of my previous collections were a direct result of experiences that I had. I talked to you about Kampala, Uganda, but also I spent time in Mexico working at a field station and with an organization called SADO Intercultural, which is the Intercultural Center of Deserts and Oceans. And that was actually an introduction by SADO. As one of their field trips, we went down and that's where I met the directors. And we've since become like lifelong friends. But without the Flinn Foundation, I would have not had that introduction. It's been important. And also, I just want to say that beyond these sort of opportunities that I was told when I got the Flinn scholarship that being a Flinn was being a part of a family. And I just want to say how deeply that resonates with me today. And it's really moving to see a lot of very beloved faces here in this crowd. So, Presence is a gift and listening is a gift, and I'm really grateful for yours this afternoon, both of you that are here and you that are also coming from afar. So this book, Wedding of the Foxes, was written in a time of rupture and recalibration during the pandemic and its aftermath as both personal and planetary losses accumulated. It's a book about invisible things, about relationships that often go unnoticed, between people, between species, between the living and dying world. It asks what we fail to see and why, what voices, human and more than human, are left out of the stories we tell, and how we might begin to notice more, to listen to the stories more deeply. It's a book woven of Japanese literature, motherhood, ecological grief, and the sixth extinction, and a preoccupation with erasure, not just what's vanishing, but how silence itself works in language, memory, and the body. It's also a book about fracture and repair, about quiet forms of resistance and resilience that emerge not in spite of what's broken, but through it. Also, Godzilla, Pokemon, Miyazaki films, all that fun stuff. All right, so I am going to begin with actually the beginning of the book so that it gives you a little bit more of an idea of how this lyric essay idea kind of functions. And this is more of a two-part braid that you're going to sort of feel moving back and forth. And I should say, just in the interest of time and being able to read a few different things for you, I'm gonna read I'm gonna jump around a little bit in this essay. So it's called Threshold, Compass and Mirror. When the gulls started fighting, it was over the trash snarled in the harbor water, paper coffee cups and oil-slicked twigs tangled among Sprite bottles. I'd left my apartment on Rugby Road in the dark and arrived in Baltimore before the aquarium opened. The sun rose. I watched the gulls pick apart a bag of Doritos, the buildings parse the pink of the sky into glassy triangles. It was the kind of waiting that makes you feel like a grimy plate of glass being slowly squeegeed. I'd driven through the early morning hours to see the sea dragons. I'd never seen them before, not in person. Like their seahorse relatives, leafy sea dragons are from the family Syngathidae, whose members possess traits so unusual that Victorian naturalists and scientists, even as recently as the 19th century, found them difficult to classify. While seahorses possess prehensile tails, leafy sea dragons are known for the leaf-like skin filaments that embellish their serpentine bodies, hybrids of both plant and dragon. When I first saw them, suspended in their aquarium, they looked like tiny golden chandeliers of seaweed. Buoyant, impossibly delicate, they moved so languidly it was as if they swam through cooling glass. I stepped closer and the sound of the crowd withdrew. I felt as though a window had opened in my chest and something had slipped inside, nudging past my sagging organs and depositing little pinprick sparks of electricity. I was no longer a self, the way the sea dragons were no longer creatures clasped in an aqueous cube. Something pulsed between and through us, and even when I drove home a few hours later, the sky seemed impossibly larger, and I still felt those invisible trailing tendrils unspooling over miles, linking their lives with mine. Years passed, and those sea dragons were mostly forgotten. One sweltering August, my partner and I were stranded in Cuba for 2 weeks when our airline went bankrupt. We flew back from Havana on a Russian plane with cigarette burns on the seats and exit signs written in Cyrillic. I started throwing up before I even got a positive pregnancy test. It happened quickly. One day I was collecting the rare books of a Cuban poet to translate. A week later, I couldn't shower or dress myself without help. Hyperemesis gravidarum is a severe pregnancy-long form of nausea and vomiting. I found myself suddenly afloat in the buzzing atmosphere of my body's molecule-level distress. I felt as though the self I knew was being sheared from me. What was left had to sink down and become something else. Time grew into a shadowy hand of erasure, relooping the text of each day at an anguishingly sluggish pace. I spent entire days in dark rooms with my eyes closed. Screens made me vomit, but sometimes I could read a little. In a winter issue of Plowshares, I found the poem The Leafy Sea Dragon by Miho Nonaka. Curled in a shadowed bedroom, I read this line: Life makes a sea full of superfluous things. It made me remember what it was like to stand in the aquarium that day, to behold a creature so unfathomable it seemed an excess. After 39 weeks and 4 days, our daughter was born and the hyperemesis ended. I ate two plates of limp hospital broccoli, and I couldn't stop crying. I was delirious with happiness, with the thrum of her newborn heart against my skin. I discovered I could shower and walk in sunlight again. After a few months, I took her to the Tucson Botanical Gardens, where cactuses with names like Powder Puff and Mexican Fire Barrel waved their blossoms like they were throwing us a party. My favorite spot to sit was the Barrio Garden with its jumble of coffee can succulents and glossy citrus and a shrine where people left their remembrances. A tiny white shoe, a crumpled wrist corsage, little winking Milagro charms, a set of car keys. We walked in that place of miracles in strange and hybrid forms. My daughter felt like one of them. But the slow erasure and transformation of parenthood is not for the faint of heart. When I first started reading Japanese literature, it was because I wanted to escape, to inhabit an unattainable space. The snow country, a room full of gold lacquerware and shadows, a spare and elegant lyricism that had nothing to do with the daily chaos of my own domestic life, a colicky baby, an environmental crisis that was becoming clearer by the day, the patriarchal structures that had become even more glaringly apparent to me as a new mother, and the struggle between trying to honor the remarkable space of my daughter's early years and watching my working life languish. In those early days, I read the work of men, Kawabata Yasunari, Tanasaki Junichiro, Akutagawa Runosuke, because they were more translated and available. When I got pregnant again, my daughter and I baked a cake for my partner and placed a small Fev charm inside, a son. Another difficult pregnancy followed and came to an end. The whiplash of those early years, sneaking chlorine-stained pages during swimming lessons, and chapters by IKEA nightlight with my son's baby snores against my chest. We hunkered down in a city with endless sinus-freezing winters and moved to another so densely populated you had to drive for an hour through nearly gridlocked traffic to reach a stinking man-made lake, to find any semblance of the natural world. I turned again and again to Japanese writers. I built a room I could live in inside that literature, then a house. I existed both in a place of neon pink Play-Doh cookies and a space where sparrows foretold futures, and a man traced his friend through successive reincarnations, each time trying to prevent his early death. Then I discovered the writing of Kurahashi Yumiko, Ota Yuko, and other Japanese women writers. This time it was like being given the key to an entirely different kind of house, one with a strangely mutable yet expansive view. They showed me the slug sliding around the ruins of Hiroshima, the devastating dissociative grief that can emerge following the death of a child, and the sheer imaginative power that allows one to endure the social isolation of single parenthood and our crippling domestic duties. Here were writers writing with, as the editors of Japanese women writers' 20th century short fiction observe, some of the most penetrating feminist perception, imagination, and thought of the age. Instead of escape, they led me deeper and pried me open. Even in this age of grief and extinction, I knew I didn't want numbness or escape. I wanted to hear something that was calling inside me to somehow unify broken and disjointed pieces, internal and external, to see what was there in the raw edges, the dissonances, the contradictions. To create a compass, the Japanese writer Tawara Yoko says, or just sharpen one's means of orientation, it's useful, I believe, to fundamentally lose one's sense of direction at least once. She speaks of the possibilities inherent in exploring a body of literature that is not of your own culture, and how it allows one to become at least partially reborn. She argues that one learns to observe the patterns in a foreign world with a kind of critical awareness and responsiveness, while also being able to see one's own culture from a perceptive distance. This kind of heightened consciousness, she said, can lead to the creation of artworks that are compasses and mirrors. I like that idea of compasses and mirrors. The words speak of both orientation and reflection. Both imply contemplation, the possibilities inherent in pause. For example, it was only when I had my own children that I realized the stories my mother read to me came from Japan. Stories about a crane wife, about a woman who follows a lost dumpling into a crack of the earth and finds monsters, about a dragon king of the river and the giant centipede he needed help defeating. Had this literature shaped my ethical landscape in the stories of the forests and the forest spirits, the sly foxes and badgers turned teapots? Was it partly this literature that had made me more sensitive to the more than human lives around me, even as a child? Whether crafted of polished bronze or volcanic obsidian, mirrors in antiquity were considered precious. Though the Romans were the first to invent glass mirrors, Venetian mirror makers used special mixtures of bronze and gold to create reflections more lustrous than reality. In Japan, mirrors were placed within Shinto shrines to converse with the gods. We don't see things as they are. We see things as we are, says Anais Nin. What if a mirror is more than a tool of simple reflection, offering alternative possibilities, enlarging perception, and making clear hidden suffering? What if a mirror allowed a species to see, instead of only the self, the connection with others, to our threatened twilight world? What if mirrors are leafy sea dragons, monarch butterflies, and red-crowned cranes? Compasses are meant to show direction and help forge a new path if one realizes the course has set is unsatisfactory or if one is simply lost. What if compasses are of many kinds, many varieties? My compasses became Oba Minako, Tawara Yoko, Shibaki Yoshiko, Tsushima Yuko, and other Japanese women writers. The lineage of colonialism is one of taking a piece of culture because it's useful to one's art or project. It's an act for the self, one that does not allow the contemplation of consequences or harm. An act of cultural exchange and contrast is one in which an artist is not only fundamentally working from a place of care and sensitivity to those consequences, but working with the aim of giving something back to that community, a reciprocity. This entangled quality of life on Earth, Deborah Birdrose tells us, depends on and supports connectivity. There are numerous ways into thinking about these matters. I offer one way, the kinship mode. It situates us here on Earth and asserts that we are not alone in time or place. We are at home where our kind of Earth life came into being, and we are members of entangled generations of Earth life, generations that succeed each other in time and place. It's the entangled places I feel most drawn to. Motherhood and monster stories, Japanese literature, and the stark reality of this sixth extinction we're currently experiencing. I want to find and make compasses and mirrors that allow me to be capable of a different kind of receptivity and insight. The leafy sea dragon is sinuous and supple like the dragons of East Asian legend. Such dragons were thought to be able to control bodies of water, rivers, lakes, seas, as well as the weather. In times of prolonged drought, Buddhist monks recited sutras to encourage the dragon king, a rain king thought to live in a pond at the Shinsen or Divine Spring Garden in Kyoto, to rise from the pond and deliver a storm. I like the thought that improbable things can become reality, that a sea dragon can exist as both tangible fact and myth. The second time I saw leafy sea dragons was at the Oceanario de Lisboa aquarium with my family. After we spent hours walking through the aquarium, we decided instead of leaving to start at the beginning and walk through the entire aquarium again. Our son wanted to return to the axolotls, our daughter the cuttlefish. After walking once more through the leafy sea dragon exhibit, I took a picture of a poem by Portuguese poet Sofia de Mello Briner Anderson that had been etched on the wall. Later, my friend sent this translation. At the bottom of the sea, there are white terrors, where plants are animals and animals are flowers. Right. Okay, I'm going to read another type of essay for you. This was a really fun sequence that I did. It turns out that unlike the Western calendar, which is composed of 4 seasons, the traditional Japanese calendar is composed of 72 microseasons. And each of these microseasons is about a 5-day-long period called a ko. And when I was doing this research and finding out about this, I realized that these the titles for these microseasons were kind of incredibly evocative. And they all spoke to the kinds of seasonal variation and seasonal changes that were happening in the world at that time. So it was sort of like frogs start singing, or rainbows hide, or things like that. So since some of these essays were written during the pandemic, I'm spending a lot of time in the backyard and a lot of time walking around the neighborhood. And I decided to keep my own journal of micro seasons. So I just took selections of those. Don't worry, there's not 72 of them. There's just a few. And I put them in the book as a kind of sequence. But these are sort of like the flash essay kind of pieces, so small. And the titles are the traditional Japanese paired with a Sonoran desert counterpart. So, and I'm going to start seasonally, kind of where we're at now. This takes place a little bit beforehand, but since our monsoons have come late, it's kind of the perfect timing. Cool winds blow, fig eater beetles swarm. It's monsoon season, air thick with moisture, sterile thunder thumping in the distance, but not yet loosening its rain. Scattered in the fine dirt around the prickly pear cactus, the green iridescent bodies of fig eater beetles. Among them, little mutilated cradles of hollowed out prickly pear fruit. They mate in throngs, lay eggs, and perish. The baby grubs winding their sleep around the dry haze of rattling leaves, around the death scrabbles of their parents, those heavy emeralds thudding the dust. How strange and how familiar to happen upon beginnings and endings in a single space. Fecundity and death meeting like old friends in a summer house where arm in arm they quietly walk about, admiring the furniture. Evening cicadas sing, purity butterflies appear. Through the grime of her windshield, she watches a single yellow butterfly swerve across 4 lanes of traffic, holds her breath. All creatures are dead when they live, she reads in an essay she stumbles upon while researching the heaviness of Abe Kogo's language, his wary observations of sand and insects. Some creatures, like butterflies, Abe writes, are more dead than others. Is that what captivates her? To be so near another body that is so close to the end, yet not in pain? They'd arrived in a gust that past week, but only, she noticed, in citrus shades, fluttering lemons and buoyant tangerines, a shudder of confetti tasting the world with its feet. That their lives would be released was inevitable, the way her son only fell asleep when holding her hair. Heat starts to die down, canyon tree frogs emerge. Here's a story she remembers from her childhood. A samurai takes a brief nap beneath an ancient cedar and dreams his way into another world. Welcomed into a lush palatial estate, he's soon invited to wed the august princess who bears him 7 children. 24 idyllic years pass. His wife falls gravely ill and dies. He's told by royal messenger he's to be sent back home and wakes to find himself still beneath the cedar only moments after he'd fallen asleep. Yet when he looks around, he finds a colony of ants, their intricate structures of straw and clay oddly familiar. Why, there's the palace, he exclaims, begins to search across the tree root for the mountain of Hanryoko, the grave of his dead princess. Finds, embedded in clay and tucked beneath a pebble shaped like a Buddhist monument, the body of a dead female ant. When the canyon tree frogs emerge, it's this story she thinks of as she watches the school children handle them so carelessly, some no larger than her smallest fingernail. Don't you know, she thinks, that one is a great poet. The other has just joined the opera. The one by the bike path is a student of the moons. Dew glistens white on grass. Black widows start to nest. That September, she learns that after the monsoons, black widows proliferate. She finds the first one in her mailbox, feels the strands of sticky web, hears it rip as she pulls out her hand. The spider is the glassy black of chilled lava. climbs towards her so nimbly she shrieks. 2 days later, she finds one on the backyard fence post, another beneath the seat of her daughter's bike. After that, 3 spherical papery egg sacs, suspended like fingernail-sized Noguchi lamps on the gate at her daughter's school. She collects them with a stick and crushes them underfoot. But once home, she remembers the first story she ever read of Tanasaki's, about the woman who gets the spider tattooed across her skin. She digs out the book and reads it again. Little by little, the tattoo marks began to take on the form of a huge black widow spider, and by the time the night sky was paling into dawn, this weird malevolent creature had stretched its 8 legs to embrace the whole of the girl's back. The woman, a timid geisha, is transformed when the tattoo is complete. Triumphant, dazzling, deadly, her old fears have been swept away. When does otherness turn to wonder? How is a story a door? That she begins to think of them as sisters, feels salacious, a juicy secret, that she starts to delight in finding their untidy, disheveled tangle webs. Did you know black widows have thousands of slit sensilla embedded in their exoskeletons? Each helps the spider sense vibrations, changes shape to tune the frequencies that echo in her web. Just a few more. Insects hole up underground, leafcutters feasting. The title of the 5-day ko makes her walk outside to the part of the yard where she knows she'll find the desert leafcutters. Their underground nests can have hundreds of chambers, nurseries, garbage compartments, fungus gardens. In the hotter months, their trails are invisible. Leafcutter ants forage in the quiet of night when the soil is cool. But the rain sage has bloomed, and now she traces the petals to their nests. It means something to see their trails loop and collide with one another, to stand still enough that she becomes implicated in their paths. She watches stragglers with their flowers held aloft like sails. Between the prickly pear and century plant, she finds one entrance, smeared with blossoms, a lavender corona spilled into the dirt. And I'll do 3 more, and then I think that. Okay. Deer shed antlers, small night rains begin. Oh, sorry, I have to take a break. The small rain falls over her insomnia hours. She keeps her face up but closes her eyes. It treads the roof like young javelina. Her daughter had foot surgery months ago. The bone graft they used has finally begun to heal. That day, she received a letter from the donor's mother. The fragment of bone they'd used in the surgery had been a section of wrist bone from her son. Her son, the letter had told her, who loved to run, went into sudden cardiac arrest and died in front of his mother before reaching the floor. Her daughter was at the pool when she opened the envelope. She sat very still at first, holding it between her fingers. Then something inside her grew white hot, and she put her forehead against the table. She wouldn't call what she did then, crying. It felt like sound was being torn out of her, the way one would tear pages from a book. The patterning of rain is eventually folded into her sleep, and when she wakes and steps out into the morning with its smell of damp creosote and slaked earth, the sense memories of dozens of desert rain mornings crowd inside of her. Each is grafted to the next. Each belongs as much as the other. Now when she rubs her daughter's foot with ointment, she thinks about that other mother, that other son. Spring's thaw, wind breaks branches. Here's what the wind has smeared. Acacia pollen, the feathers of a Gila woodpecker, the carmine fruit of prickly pear. Here's what the wind has broken. The branch of the 100-year-old Palo Verde tree, the mourning dove nest. What has she learned? The world is speaking all the time, that much she's certain of. What she hadn't considered, what she knows now with equal certainty, is that the world is listening to her too. And the last one. Ice thickens on streams, snowflakes drift. Snow in the desert is a dream, a mirage. The children stop everything, run barefoot out into the yard, hands up spinning, leaping among aloes. There is no defter feather. It melts momentarily, falls so quietly, it reminds her of Basho. Real poetry, he says, is to lead a beautiful life. To live poetry is better than to write it. All begins to blur. Snow falling into abandoned nests, snow falling like the trees require a blanket. The doves, stunned by these chilled feathers, retreat. She sees their black eyes inside the branches, prescient, unblinking. Memory is a palimpsest, didn't you know? What is out there is the whole world being erased, reborn. Yeah.
Thank you. This is wonderful writing. And since we have 2 more minutes before our scheduled time to open questions, I'm going to ask one of mine. I read this book as in part a response to a dialogue with radial symmetry. And you return to some of the settings, you return to some of the same thematic concerns that it had. You also seem to approach your material very differently, as if a few years have passed. And in my opinion, as a better and braver writer. How would you describe your evolution as a writer over that period of time from your first book to your third?
That's a good question. It does actually, there are definitely territories that are very similar in both books. I think that there's a series in Radial Symmetry called Ghost Nets, in which I talk about the lost and discarded fishing nets. Ghost nets are lost and discarded fishing nets that continue to sort of trap marine creatures and sea life. And that was really based on my time living in Mexico. And it works as a sequence. It's a long sequence. And I think that was really like the first lyric essay that I've ever written.
Mm.
And so part of what I love about the lyric essay is a little bit about what I was saying before, that it allows you to think alongside the writer. And so I just found that working with creative nonfiction, there was so much more that I could include and so many more detours that I could take. So I could include work of philosophers that I liked and sort of tuck their writing in there. And one of the things that I did to really honor the work of these Japanese women writers was to actually include their work in there as well. And so I think that it just gave me so much more room to really explore on the page and kind of work out for myself, so that in the difference of a poem from Radial Symmetry is they occupy some of the same, they have the same preoccupations, but this book was so intentional in what it was trying to do. And this book really arose because I had been talking to a lot of my students and I've been experiencing myself like a tremendous amount of helplessness and feeling like some of these environmental questions and the problems that we were facing were so overwhelming that there was a sense of apathy. And so many of the conversations were about that, about apathy, about not knowing, and about trauma. And I said to myself that I really wanted to write a book that was actually about practices of repair and that could be in some ways a kind of nourishing book and a more hopeful book. And so each of these is written with that in mind. Each of the essays sort of encompasses some piece that actually in my own life has been really helpful. So for example, even though the letters are to Japanese women writers, they also cover, like each has a very specific topic that it's trying to work with. So You know, the idea of finding your own form of resistance, or the idea of solitude, which is so important in a time like this where we're so digitally inundated all of the time. So I think in your first book, you're just sort of finding your way into the world and each is sort of coming. But because this took so long, you know, there was a big gap of time because it was a form in which I could do something very intentional. That's it came together in that way, like that. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I think it was just so fascinating to me because I started down this road of reading a lot of literature, and so many of my colleagues are both in the sciences and the arts are really deep writers and deep readers. And I just was so surprised to find all of these writer friends of mine had no idea of these that these women they didn't recognize the names at all. But I would say some of the other names, Kawabata, Tanasaki, that would be very recognizable. So it became kind of an obsession of mine to really like find their work. And so I went and I found literally everything that I could find and read everything that I could find. And it was actually very difficult for me to only choose like 7 of the group. So to say, I mean, I think this happens with writers. We do become kind of obsessed with things. But if you read the book, you'll even see I wrote to their translators and beautifully, some of them wrote back to me, and I included some of the stories that they told me of their lives in the work, and that was kind of an amazing thing too. So it did take on definitely a life of its own and became kind of like my own, definitely my own personal research project. And I think in times where like I just wasn't sure that I was going to be able to finish the book or not, I was really driven by the idea that these women wrote such phenomenal, brilliant things, and that if my book could be a way to shepherd their writing into the world, that really meant a great deal to me, because some of their work really became like touchstones for my own life, and I carry their lines with me everywhere I go. There's a really great line of Annie Dillard's in Pilgrim at Tinker Creek where she's like, I'm trying all the time just to keep my eyes open, you know, in her first essay. I think that being trained and being in like ecology and working for a long time in that field, you really do start to notice things. You have to really sit there. And one of the most, I talked to you about Tony Burgess, who is the person who really introduced me into sort of like Sonoran desert ecology. And the first lesson that he ever did with us when we were at the biosphere was he took us out to the desert and he's like, okay, I'm going to leave you here for like 3 hours. He's like, and when I come back, I want you to tell me what you noticed. And that was literally it. And it was like one of the most remarkable experiences of my life, because at first you're like, what the heck was, you know, and then you're kind of in groups and you're kind of whatever. And then you're kind of going along and then you actually do start to notice things. You're like, wait, why are all the saguaros growing under like the mesquite trees? Like, is that something that's happening? You know, so like all of those patterns, I think that was like, that's the training of an ecological eye, I would say. And then I think the other part is just like, I tell my daughter this because she's also this way. Like, I'm just a noticer. I've just been that way since I was born. Like, I'm the person that walks into the room and was like, wait, those 2 people are fighting, even though there's not anything, you know, it's just like, I don't know. So it's kind of like in me, I think, too, to be a noticer. But I think to be that kind of writer, like Annie Dillard, like Rebecca Solnit, some of these people that really have tuned their eye. It is a practice. You know, it is like a practice of doing it. Like one of my, we talked about influences. I really loved reading and often still go to Anais Nin's diaries as just a practice of like noticing, right? Like in my everyday, like what are the pieces? Like what am I curating? What am I taking out of my life? And you realize like how much you lose when you don't write it down. You forget, or at least I do, my old brain. But that part of it, so like curating that practice of paying attention.
And this is a book that encourages the reader to pay more attention to. I took it with me on a backpacking trip with my family a few weeks ago, and it was sunrise. So I thought, okay, everybody's asleep. I'll go sit on a rock. And I went and sat on the rock and was reading for a while. And then I took a look around me at the way that the fire had come through recently. And the agaves were all black at the tips, but there was enough water in them that you could see that it had allowed the plant to survive. And I wouldn't have paid attention to that, or to the cactus that I was just about to sit on, if I hadn't been reading at that moment. So thank you for that. First you didn't.
And then I didn't again. Oh, it's so hard. And honestly, like my entire life has been a practice of doing the two things in parallel. So I got the BS and then I was getting the BA at the same time. And then when I went over to do my MFA in creative writing, I was working in a molecular biology lab. So I was like, and then after, like even teaching in an MFA program, I'm teaching a lot of climate writing and climate, storytelling and environmental literature. So I am one of those hybrid pieces that would encourage you to be different in the ways that you want to be different. And I think, probably the biggest bottleneck of my life in terms of deciding those things has just been having kids, because suddenly I had a lot less time in which to sort of explore those things. But I do think that there are certain minds and certain fields that benefit from that kind of interdisciplinary thinking, and that your engineering can affect the marketing, can affect, that it doesn't have to, you don't necessarily, I mean, I just didn't choose. And then in the end, it was like, okay, well, I guess I'm just moving along and doing both. So yeah.
There is a portion of this book that you didn't read that is really unfamiliar to me as a reader, where you talk about a book that didn't work out. And that in itself to even disclose that is brave. But your exploration in that book and woven throughout of failure is really beautiful. And I'd like, this is sort of the self-help part where you talk for a moment to this group of current and alumni Flinn Scholars about what you've learned as a creative person about how to approach failure.
So for the context, for those of you that haven't read the essay, I spent about 8 years writing a novel, and came to the end of that 8 years after really spending a lot of time invested in researching and rewriting and everything, and basically realized that the book was actually a failure. Like it was not a workable thing. And so the entire essay, this is one, I have 3 this is the art of failure, because I think it's like one of the most important things to think about. And especially, I would say, for this like enormously gifted group of people that you are, that when you're good at a lot of different things, it can be devastating to fail at something. And yet that very failure can be the thing that allows you to move forward into a whole new like sense of your being and possibility in the world. And so that's basically what the essay explores in a lot of ways. And that these sort of ideas of what it means to be successful and sort of social constructs that we have around being successful are things that we really need to interrogate. And I think that it becomes like a very personal process of like yourself, like outside of any external validation from your peer group, from your family, from your like any of that, like what it means for you to be in the world and how you imagine that being, how you imagine your gifts, like your very particular gifts, which may be like unusual and even weird gifts. Like I feel like some of my gifts are very weird gifts, and hybrid gifts, you know, that what are the kinds of things that allow you to thrive in that way? So failure is so crucial, and it's it's hard. The essay covers like a lot of different kinds of territory about what it can give you, and it gives sort of examples from my life and from my daughter's life too. But yeah, I don't know if I can totally wrap it up. Read the essay.
Exactly. Buy the book, read the essay.
But I really worked hard on that essay actually, and it was that's one of my favorites.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's such a good question. I think that it really is a little bit paired with Mia's question too, which is really about how one begins to curate one's attention. And I say curate because it is like a very intentional act. It's like I think that, I mean, like I'm a dinosaur, you all. I had email when I was like, my first email was when I was literally in college, like that, and that was like a big deal. It was like this is so we're embedded in a totally different kind of world. I think that in terms of finding ways to do deep kind of visionary work and to find the space to sort of have that attention, you have to find a way to sort of like curate that space. So whatever it is, like for me, a lot of it is like getting out and hiking or walking like in the early morning when nobody's there. But I have a very intentional meditation practice too that really helps me a lot of times, but essentially like turning it off, like really like it's so hard to do. You know, like there's a reason that phones are addictive and that we can't, I mean, like eventually we'll just become cyborgs and they'll just be embedded in our bodies, you know, and we have to be like, you have to actually learn how to do that for yourself and find the spaces in which you can like have a little bit of breathing room. And a little bit like Matt was saying, you know, those moments where you can do that suddenly, I think it's so much about like being in the present moment, like practices that allow you to sort of stop and then clear it out and then pay attention. Yeah. We talked about influences, and like one full section of my influences is actually a number of sci-fi writers. I'm like a hardcore fan. I love it. And I love like classic sci-fi, like Ray Bradbury and Heinlein, and read all of Philip K. Dick and blah, blah. So yes, you're correct that that is there. And in fact, my novel was actually like a science fiction novel too, my failed novel. Um, that became an essay. And might become, who knows, whatever. So you know, I think that these questions of the environment are some of the most pressing questions that we have. The work that I was doing in teaching at Stone Coast in my like a low residency MFA program was a lot about environmental justice and about the fact that there is such inequity in the way that climate change is going to affect populations in the planet. But it's not just climate change. It is like this sixth extinction that's happening in front of us, where we're not even aware of what's being lost before it's actually lost. Loss of habitat, loss of relationships, loss of Indigenous storytelling. There's so many losses. And I think at this particular moment too, politically, we're at a place where some of that is being set to the back burner because we're focusing on other things that are on fire. But these things are happening now. So more extreme weather events are going to be happening more and more often. More extreme, pieces of our lives are going to be affected by this. Climate migrations are going to be happening. And so for me, it was like, it has to be something that to talk about, in the same way that I was obsessed with the Japanese women writers, and in part because of their relationship and the way they explained their relationship to the natural world. For me, this is like a deep passion project that really requires all of our attention. And in the same way that I talked a little bit about failure and about like hybrid learning and things like that, I think that the only way to solve some of these really difficult and seemingly intractable problems is to actually do it in a way that is sort of interdisciplinary, and to do it in a way that really asks a lot of different kinds of questions. And we ask a lot of different kinds of questions about what it even means to like live a sustainable life. Like, what does that look like? How can we change things as a result? So, yeah. I mean, I think like this is, in the end, this is like the difference between people that like continue to write and the people that quit writing. It's like you just realize like all of writing is revision. Is like it truly is, I like 100% there are those moments where you can sort of get something down and maybe the first draft has something really vital and a spark to it. But for me, at least as a writer, it's like a constant act of revision. And like, even as I'm reading it to you all, I'm like, oh, wait, I should. So putting a book together is a really weird thing, because sometimes, and especially like when I talk to some students that are especially publishing a first book, a lot of times that work can span so many different years, and it inhabits so many different like versions of yourself that it can actually be really difficult to sort of do. I was lucky with this project because it was like a very focused project. I knew that there were like these sets of things that I really wanted from it. So I think that made it easier. I was also working, I have a writing group, which is a set of colleagues that are also professional writers, and they're like the most lovely people. And I highly recommend for anybody that wants to sort of have a sustainable writing practice that you have a writing group, because they just keep you honest and accountable. And so it was really helpful to have that consistent set of voices that were sort of like, oh, we have questions, what do you know about this? So each book, like, every time you write a different book, like you would think, oh, I know something about doing this, and it turns out like you never know. You're always in the deep end. You're always just trying to figure it out. It's always something new. So having like a couple of those tools, like knowing that it's going to be a lot of work to edit it, and knowing that it's going to be like, by the time you finish a book, you're done with it, because you're like, oh my God, I hate this. Like I never, ever want to read these. I never want to see this again. Like I can't, So this is a woodblock print, and it's a Japanese woodblock print, Hiroshige, and I love it because it is talking about, first of all, the foxes in the print don't totally look like foxes. They look like hybrids of something, and I think it helps with the idea. So much of the book is about kind of defamiliarizing this, the idea of like the nature is being separate from us, and also seeing it in this very new way. And so they look like foxes, but they're also not quite like foxes. And then what you see in the distance is basically foxfire, which is part of a Japanese ceremony that's done in the new year. And so it kind of binds all of those things together. Yeah. And I mean, the frank answer is like, there were years when my kids were little that I did not write. And that's basically, I think, like my practice was reading. That was like literally all I had the bandwidth to do. you know, some of it's kind of in there, but, you know, trying to breastfeed every 2 hours for like a year around the clock and literally being so sleep deprived, I was nearly, I mean, dead tired. So there are moments and seasons of life in which I don't know that it's super possible to be a creative being. And so then when more breathing room, I think you do have to actually be disciplined about it. So there's like a couple of things. The writing group for me has been super helpful because it's really nice to have people you're accountable to. You don't want to just show up and be like, oh, sorry, y'all, you know. So that's one thing. I made a space for myself. I have this like, I was given this beautiful antique desk by a friend of mine that's since passed away. And so I can like open it up. It's one of those like you unlock it and you open it up. And then I have like a few books of Bachelard there. And so I like take out my Bachelard books, I read it for 5 minutes, and then I just like begin. And I think that the only way to do it, and I talk a lot to my students about this. It's much easier to try and do something consistently in small increments and make progress than it is to try and like clear out whole sections of it and be like, oh, I'll do it in the summer. I'll write the book in the summer. It's so much easier to be like, okay, just take half an hour and just do it like this. There's a poet that I talk about in this, in my failure essay, named Francis Ponge. And I actually talk about him too in another essay in Broken Toy Party. And he had 30 minutes a night to work. Truly, that was it. He wrote these incredible prose poems that I find just so moving. And he did it by working in just 30-minute increments. And you'll find this, I think, with a lot of different poets. There's a really wonderful Polish poet that I know that we were talking once, he said the same thing. He's like, I compose my poems literally while I'm walking to work. Thomas Tranströmer, who's a Swedish poet and a Nobel laureate, he, you know, he worked all day counseling youth and then found sort of like these little moments. So I did this thing. My husband actually was like, you're spending too much time on your phone. I was like, I don't spend nearly as much time on your like my phone as you spend on your phone. Well, we started this thing. So he's like a very tech savvy guy. So you can install this app on my phone. And he's like, I'm going to show you. And it was unbelievable. I could not believe how much time I spent on my phone. And it was like, if I could just take that and like move it. So that's it. I mean, and then the bottom line is like, it does involve saying no to like usually your kids. And sometimes that's really, really hard to do. And I think that I just have waited until they were a little bit older. And because they're now in their own lives and doing their own things, it's like a little bit easier for me to carve out some of that space where I can have that. But it's like the eternal question. It's so hard.